Portal is a game that holds a very special place in my heart. I got both Portal and Portal 2 for a grand total of $2 American during the Steam Summer Sale in 2020, and I played both of those games to death. I started out by playing Portal. Something about the gameplay in Portal was just so mesmerizing to me. The puzzles were all so cleverly crafted, and the physics felt so natural in a game where you'd expect them to be anything but. I had a lot of fun figuring out the puzzles the first time around, and when I ended up playing the game over and over again and I already knew all the answers to the puzzles, I'd try and see how quickly I could finish them. I think the fact that I played the game over and over again says a lot about the quality of the game. At the time, I really wasn't one to play a game multiple times. I'd usually try to finish a game as quickly as possible, and once I did, I'd move on to the next just so I could get it out of the backlog. Especially in single-player games, if I already knew how the story was going to end, I didn't have much motivation to finish it because what's it going to do for me? I know exactly what's going to happen. Portal became an exception though. I replayed it more times than I could count, since the gameplay just clicked so well for me. It was a game that I could wind down my day with by getting a quick playthrough in. Once again, I knew most of the story before I even played the game, but I still had so much fun, even with the story. I loved discovering all the secrets and the lore I found throughout the game. I hadn't played any of the Half-Life games, and I didn't know anything about the Half-Life games, so it was really cool finding out that Portal and Half-Life take place in the same universe. I didn't know anything about Doug Ratman, so discovering his hideouts really added to the environment and overall experience for me, and they kinda creeped me out. The game felt so mysterious and ominous. I felt so isolated, yet not completely alone. GLaDOS was watching my every move, of course, but the environment created this eerie feeling that there was something else there. I don't know if anybody else had that same feeling, but that liminal space, back rooms kind of vibe really added to my overall enjoyment of the game. GLaDOS was very well written in this game, being funny and threatening all at the same time. The writers struck a perfect balance that let me laugh at GLaDOS every now and then without feeling entirely safe. She was always passive-aggressive in the funniest way. Not many games are able to strike a balance like that between humor and seriousness, but Portal does it flawlessly. The music of the game was amazing, and it did a great job adding to the ominous vibe of the testing facility. It's kinda like how in Breath of the Wild, there are some songs on the soundtrack that are just a bunch of random piano notes played far apart from each other. The songs don't really make much sense outside of the context of the game, but they fit the world so well and are beautiful in the context of the game. It's pretty similar for Portal. There are a bunch of songs on the Portal soundtrack that do hold up really well on their own though. Songs like 4000 Degrees Kelvin and Still Alive are all amazing. I actually ended up setting the version of Still Alive that plays on the radios throughout the game as my ringtone. I set that ringtone back in 2020, and here in 2024, it's still going strong. Hands down, the best song in the game was Still Alive. I did not expect GLaDOS to sing me a song after I beat the game, let alone sing it well. Like, the fact that there was a song at all was surprising, but the song being good just blew my mind. Ellen McLean did an amazing job singing it. That song was stuck in my head for a good week after beating Portal for the first time. I ended up looking up Jonathan Colton, the guy who wrote the song, and I listened to some of his other music, and he's really good. If you guys ever get the chance, I highly recommend giving his music a listen. You will not be disappointed. Overall, I had an amazing time with Portal. I played the crap out of it, and despite getting Portal 2 in the same bundle as Portal, I didn't feel the need to start playing Portal 2 for a while. Eventually though, I did get around to starting Portal 2, and boy am I glad I did. To this day, Portal 2 has remained one of my favorite games of all time, and is the shining example of what a sequel should be. I truly believe that Portal 2 is the perfect sequel. They say that sequels don't top the original, but Portal 2 proves that statement completely wrong. Portal's story, while it is good and it definitely gets the job done, isn't anything special. That is to be expected though, since Valve was definitely taking a chance on Portal. They didn't make Portal that big of a game or that long, because they didn't want to make a big investment in the game if it ever failed. That's why the game was bundled with the Orange Box. Portal's story shines not in what's said, but what isn't said. The ominous tones of the testing facility tell you you that tragedy fell upon the scientists long before GLaDOS actually tells you that. Portal 2 takes that to a whole new level. The overgrowth taking over the facility and the ominous music let you know that a lot of time has passed. There are more Ratman dens to discover, and the many areas in the game all give off the same liminal space, back rooms vibe that made the first game so cool. And it's not just the vibes that tell the story. You can pick up on little tidbits of lore just by looking around. For example, you can find the dock for the Borealis in the depths of the Aperture Science facility. You can also find a science project by Chell for Bring Your Daughter to Work Day, which raises a lot of questions about who Chell's parents really are. That's something I love about this story. While I love that it answers a lot of the questions someone might have had after beating Portal, it creates a lot of questions of its own. Who are Chell's parents? How far in the future does the game take place? And since the game takes place a decent time out in the future, what happened after the events of Half-Life 2 Episode 2? I was genuinely intrigued by the story and always wanted to know what would happen next. The story was also so much more baked into the game, with more time spent exploring and solving puzzles throughout the facility rather than sticking to the testing chambers. The story is pretty unique in that it's both a sequel and a prequel all at the same time. The events of the game take place a long time after the events of the first game, but the story of Portal 2 sheds a lot of light on what happens to Aperture Science before the events of the first game. It was a really cool way of telling the story that I honestly haven't seen used in many other games or any form of media at all. The story was definitely carried by its characters. There is not a single bad character in Portal 2. The characters added a charm to Portal 2 that few games have been able to match, and they added a sense of humor to the game that no other game has been able to match. I can confidently say that Portal 2 is the funniest game I have ever played. GLaDOS is one of my favorite villains ever, if not my favorite villain. Her passive-aggressive comments had me laughing all throughout the game. Her character was expanded upon a lot in Portal 2. Instead of just being the generic, evil AI that she was in the first game, we actually got a backstory and a bit of insight into why she did what she did. Ellen McLean did an amazing job as GLaDOS, and she really sold the character. Wheatley was also an amazing character, holy crap. Just like GLaDOS, Wheatley had me cracking up all throughout the game. I always laugh at his lines, even though I've been hearing them for years. Every single time I replay the game, I laugh at the same Wheatley lines. They just never get old. Stephen Merchant put so much emotion into the character, and the designers and animators did a great job helping with that. Wheatley is basically just a mechanical eyeball, but he shows more emotion than most video game characters I've ever seen. I can't believe that Valve actually got J.K. Simmons, J. Jonah Jameson himself, to play Cave Johnson. Just like all the other voice actors, J.K. Simmons does an amazing job portraying Cave Johnson. Cave Johnson's utter mismanagement of Aperture Science is really funny, and it kind of reminds me of Michael Scott from The Office in a way. The Don't Make Lemonade rant still lives rent-free in my brain. It's really funny. Even the characters that aren't essential to the story still add a lot to the experience. Side characters like the corrupted personality cores add humor and charm to the game. What would the game be without the Space Core? Could you even beat the final boss without the extremely useful and very important advice from the Adventure Sphere? Probably not. The Oracle turret makes some crazy connections to the story of Portal 2 and Greek mythology, and it foreshadows a lot of the events of the game in a really funny way. The other turrets actually have personalities in Portal 2, rather than simply firing at you like they did in the first game. The story overall is written so well. It's genuinely interesting, really funny, and has such amazing characters. This game produced some great memes like I'm a Potato and the Don't Make Lemonade rant, which I think are worthy successors to The Cake is a Lie. It's to be expected that Portal 2 would have a much more fleshed out story than the first game. Still though, it's wild to see how good of a story they made for Portal 2. It expanded upon the story of the first game in such a tremendous way, and is genuinely one of my favorite video game stories of all time. The gameplay of Portal 2 also expanded upon what we had in the original in such an amazing way. The gameplay was so good in the first Portal game, but Portal 2 made it even better, and it made the gameplay of the first game pale in comparison. It added plenty of new mechanics to the game, and it expanded upon what we already had by making the player use certain mechanics in ways that they hadn't before. Something I love about Portal 2 is that, despite being a sequel, it can be played by someone that's never played the first game. While a sequel obviously doesn't have to be able to be picked up by new players, I definitely think it's a plus if it can be. The story in Portal 2 is welcoming to new players, and so is the gameplay. The first handful of testing chambers are taken straight from the first game. This allows new players to get the hang of the game, while also showing returning players just how dilapidated the facility has become and how much time has passed. It's a lot of world building. I think that the way that the developers multitasked like that is genius. It's something so simple, yet so smart. There are plenty of new additions to the puzzles, like the reflection cube, aerial faith plate, light surface, the multiple gels that can be used, and much more. They all add a twist to the gameplay and allow it to be changed up a bit. The first game's gameplay was somewhat limited in comparison. These gameplay mechanics added in Portal 2 are all used in such clever ways, and the times that they're introduced is spaced out, so the constant introduction of gameplay mechanics makes the game always feel fresh. I mentioned it earlier, but I cannot stress enough how cool it was to make my way through different parts of the Aperture Science facility rather than just the testing chambers. It was really cool how in the first game we got to explore the actual facilities of Aperture Science towards the end rather than just sticking to the testing chambers, but it was kinda limited since we did spend most of our times in the testing chambers. Portal 2 had such clever puzzles that took advantage of the structures of the facility. They made me think outside the box. The game struck a perfect balance with the difficulty of the puzzles where it didn't feel like they were too easy, but they also didn't feel like they were extremely difficult either. I felt like a genius after solving some of the puzzles. There was never a puzzle that I felt the need to look up the answer to, or felt like I never would have figured out without any help. Portal 2 solved a slight issue I had with the first game, and that was the length. I've grown to appreciate how short the first game is, since I can sit down and play through the entire thing in one sitting if I don't have much time, but it was a bit of a bummer at first to beat the game so quickly. Portal 2 took me about 8 hours to beat, which is a lot more than the 2 hours it took me to beat the first game. It took me more than one sitting to beat Portal 2, which was pretty nice. A downside of Portal 2 being longer though, is that it isn't as replayable to me. I've still replayed Portal 2 a million times, don't get me wrong, but it's not like I can sit down and beat the game within an hour or within one sitting like I could with the first game. Still though, I'm not complaining about the length of the game, since it meant that there was just more Portal goodness for me to experience. If 8 hours isn't enough for someone though, that's totally fine. It's actually not a problem. There's a map builder mode where you can make your own testing chambers. Now, to be honest, I haven't played it very much, but I did have fun with it for the little time I spent playing it. I love games like Mario Maker that let me make whatever I want, and although the levels I make are usually terrible, it's still a lot of fun to make them. Portal 2 has a multiplayer mode too. You and another player take control of 2 robots and go through testing chambers. I love games like It Takes Two and A Way Out, where you play through a storyline with a friend. I don't know if it's just my friend group that's like this, or if it's in everyone else's, but those kinds of games always end up being so chaotic, since we're always sabotaging each other. To be honest though, I wouldn't have it any other way. There are multiple courses to try, each with a handful of testing chambers, so there's a good amount of content in the co-op mode. The teamwork required to make your way through all the chambers makes for a really fun time with your friends. Your friendship may be good, but is it good enough to survive a session of the Portal 2 co-op mode? Probably not. I had a lot of fun with the co-op mode. When the Portal Companion Collection was announced for the Switch, I was really excited since even more of my friends could play the co-op mode with me. But they never ended up buying the game. As a result, I haven't played the co-op mode all that much, but the time I did spend playing it was amazing. I would gladly pay the full $10 price of the game just for that one mode. The music in Portal 2 was amazing. Just like in the first game, it does a great job adding to the ambiance and vibe of the facility. There are some amazing songs in the soundtrack, like the part where he kills you, which I listen to all the time when I go on runs. It really gets me hyped up. Valve brought back Jonathan Coulton to write the credits song for Portal 2, Want You Gone, and it's another banger. Ellen McLean did a great job singing this one just like Still Alive. She didn't just sing Want You Gone though, she sang a freaking opera right before the game ended. Of all the things that happened, the one I expected the least was to be serenaded right before the credits, but you know what? I'm not complaining. Overall, Portal 2 adds so much new content, and it expands upon all the great things we got with the first game. Don't get me wrong, Portal is a great game, but it pales in comparison to Portal 2. Portal 2 improved and expanded upon the first game in every single way, and it does so flawlessly. I think that a lot of game developers try too hard to reinvent the wheel, when all they really need to do is just expand upon what worked in the first game. A lot of sequels fall short for that very reason. It went above and beyond to build upon everything that was great about the first game, and it paid off. It's criminal that a game like Portal 2 is dropped to such such a low price during Steam sales. I'd gladly buy this game for $70 or $60, let alone the usual $10 price. The fact that it drops to 99 cents during summer sales or winter sales is straight up criminal. If you haven't played either of the Portal games, please, I am begging you. You have to play the Portal games. I can guarantee you that you will not be disappointed. You can run it on pretty much any computer nowadays, so that really shouldn't be an issue. You have no excuse to not play these games. They are entirely deserving of their reputation as some of the best games ever made. And there's a reason why Valve has released so many amazing games like Portal and Portal 2. They know how to make masterpieces, and playing Portal 2 made me so sad that they don't release games as much anymore, or at least not single-player ones. They do seem to be picking up some momentum lately with the recent release of CS2 and rumors of a new hero shooter. Still, I miss the single-player games that they would release. Portal 2 takes place so far in the future that the events of Half-Life 3, whatever they are, had to have happened by then. People have used clues from Portal 2 to try and figure out what happens in Half-Life 3, but I don't want to have to speculate anymore. I want to know, dang it! It wouldn't be a true Portal video if I didn't mention that Gabe Newell can't count to 3. I really hope he does someday, but I'm not holding my breath. Portal and Portal 2 are such amazing games, and I think it's such a wasted opportunity to not try to expand upon them. I don't know how they could continue the story since Portal 2 ends on a pretty conclusive note, but there's so much potential with the gameplay mechanics. We've got a better chance of seeing pigs fly than getting Portal 3 though, and you know what? I'm fine with that. I'll stick to Portal 2 until then, and that's alright. There's still science to be done.